إذا شئت سهلا. اللهم ذكرنا ما نسينا وعلمنا ما جهلنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم إنا نعوذ بك من حال أهل النار لله تعالى. I praise Allah, I glorify Him, and I thank Him. I testify no one deserves to be worshipped except Allah, and I testify Muhammad is His messenger. We correct our intentions. We left off at conditions of prayer before commencement. Actually we have a small section on page 140 before we continue. 139. We'll start from the bottom of page 138. The author said, it is sunnah to pray optional prayers each night among the nights of Ramadan. The least number for those optional prayers is 2 rak'ahs. There is no specific limit for the maximum number. So it is permissible to pray at night during any night of Ramadan 2 rak'ahs, or 4 or 6 or more than that, 26, 40, 100, etc. The rule is that this night prayer during the month of Ramadan is prayed each 2 rak'ahs with the closing salam and so on. During the time of the Prophet ﷺ, he did not order the people to pray this prayer in Ramadan behind one imam in congregation. So this was during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. He did not order the people to pray this prayer in congregation, the Prophet ﷺ himself. So it's important to understand the meaning of the action of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ, he did not order the people to pray this prayer in Ramadan behind one imam in congregation. Footnote 223, the Taraweeh prayer is prayed after praying the Isha prayer, even if the Isha prayer was prayed during the Maghrib prayer time, and the time for it continues until dawn. Each 4 rak'ahs are referred to as 1 Taraweeh, so there are 5 Taraweeh. For each 2 rak'ah, one would intend to pray Sunnatul Taraweeh or Sunnat Qiyam Ramadan. The Taraweeh prayer consists of 20 rak'ahs with 10 taslim, with 10 closing salams. So one cannot pray 4 or more rak'ahs with a taslim, with one assalamu alaikum. There is a taslim after every 2 rak'ah. It is better preferred to recite the whole Quran while praying the Taraweeh during the month of Ramadan, as is the habit in many areas, meaning to recite one juz of the Quran each night of Ramadan. There's a typo there. It should be J-U-Z apostrophe. So if you have a hard copy, you can fix it. Going back to the main body of the book. So we said that the Prophet ﷺ, he did not order the people to pray Taraweeh or Qiyam Ramadan. He did not order the people to pray Qiyam Ramadan behind one imam in congregation. So this is important information to understand, because nowadays the Wahhabiyya, they claim that everything that the Prophet ﷺ didn't do or didn't order us to do, they claim that it is automatically forbidden. And here we have that the Prophet ﷺ did not do, he did not order the people to do, and he actually, you're going to see what it says here when we mention the detail. He did not tell people to come and pray them, yani the prayer at night after Isha during Ramadan. He did not tell the people to come pray them behind him in the masjid. Once the Prophet ﷺ prayed in his masjid the night prayer of Ramadan, and so some of the Muslims prayed behind him. So basically, the Prophet ﷺ did not say anything about praying together that prayer, that sunnah prayer at night after Isha during Ramadan. He didn't mention anything about it. Once he came to the mosque, to the masjid, and he prayed that night prayer of Ramadan, and the people prayed behind him. The Muslims prayed behind him. The next night he prayed in the masjid and more people prayed behind him. Then on the third or fourth day, he did not come out to the masjid to pray at night. So in the beginning, the Prophet ﷺ, when he came out to the masjid, he didn't announce it to the people and say, come and pray this night prayer of Ramadan behind me in congregation. He didn't say, come join me and pray this prayer with me. The Prophet ﷺ didn't announce that to the Muslims. But then one night he came out to the masjid and he prayed that night prayer. And so the Muslims, they saw him, and what instinctively would the Muslim do? If he sees the Prophet ﷺ praying, he prays behind him. So then the next night he prayed in the masjid again and more people prayed behind him. So 2 nights in a row. Then on the third or fourth day, he did not come out to the masjid to pray at night. They waited for him, but he did not come out. When they asked him about that, he said that he did not want it to become an obligation on them. After the death of the Prophet ﷺ, during the time of Abu Bakr did not gather the people to pray this prayer behind one imam. It was during the rulership of Umar that he gathered the Muslims in Medina to pray the prayer of Ramadan behind one imam. Umar radiyallahu anhu then looked at them praying behind one imam and said, Ni'matil bid'atu hadih, or Ni'mal bid'atu hadih. What a good innovation this is. Then he said, but to pray the night prayer of Ramadan in the second half of the night is better than to pray in the first half. And going back to the subject matter of the author. But here the author mentioned that story that happened with our master Umar to show that what the Wahhabis claim about everything that the Prophet ﷺ didn't do is forbidden, that it is a false claim and it doesn't have any basis Islamically. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ, in this case, he went out to the masjid to pray the night prayer of Ramadan, and the people happened to follow him. And then he came the second night and more people prayed behind him. And then he stopped and he didn't come out to pray that prayer in the masjid. So when the people asked him about that, what did he say? He said he did not want it to become an obligation upon them. So he stopped doing it. And then during the time of Abu Bakr, he didn't gather the people to pray this prayer behind one imam. And he was the caliph for about 2 years. And then Umar, when he was the ruler, he gathered the Muslims, and he initiated that, and he took it upon himself to gather the Muslims to pray the prayer of Ramadan behind one imam. And then when he saw them praying, he said, Ni'matil bid'atu hadhihi. So this is a proof against the Wahhabis. Then the author said, but to pray the night prayer of Ramadan in the second half of the night is better than to pray it in the first half. So it is better to go to sleep and then wake up and pray it, and then to pray the witr. This hadith is among the proofs which Ahlul Sunnah mention to emphasize that not every innovation that pertains to the religion is a bad innovation. Rather, there are good innovations and bad innovations. Umar said, what a good innovation this is. So he called it a good innovation. It is related to the matters of the religion, and he called it a good innovation. He praised it. This hadith was narrated by Al-Bukhari, Malik, and others. First, Umar gathered the people to pray 11 or 13 rak'ahs behind the imam, counting the witr. Then he asked the imam to pray 20 rak'ah. Since Umar ordered the imam to pray 20 rak'ah, it became the habit of the Muslims in many countries to pray in Ramadan each night 20 rak'ah. Those 20 rak'ah are what the scholars call the prayer of Taraweeh. This is why some scholars said that if someone prays during the night of Ramadan with the intention of praying the Taraweeh prayer, he does not pray more than 20 rak'ah, because since the time of Umar, the name Taraweeh became associated with 20 rak'ah. If someone wants to pray more than 20 rak'ah, it is permissible. This is what Ahlul Sunnah says. If you have the hard copy, on page 140, and near the end of that paragraph, and it's missing the S. It should say, this is what Ahlul Sunnah says. The Prophet ﷺ did not prevent the Muslims from praying more than that. Some claim that one is only allowed to pray 8 rak'ahs. It was confirmed that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned the permissibility to pray more than 8 rak'ahs. He himself prayed more than 8, and he said clearly that it is permissible to pray more than that. All the Muslim scholars, Shafi'is, Hanafis, Malikis, and others say it is permissible. So there is no ground at all for those who claim that it is not allowed. So this is another proof against the Wahhabiyya, which is that they claim anything that the Prophet ﷺ didn't do is forbidden. And among the things that the Prophet ﷺ did not do is pray 20 rak'ahs for the Taraweeh. So that's another thing that our Master Umar radiallahu anhu, that he added. Now moving on to the new chapter, page 141, conditions of prayer before commencement. So these are the matters that they have to be done in order for the prayer to be valid, which are not part of the prayer itself. So these things, if they're not done, the prayer would be invalid, but they themselves are not part of the prayer. So we're going to start with the metin first, which is everything that's above the line, and then we're going to read what's below the line. The author said, conditions of prayer before commencement. The prayer has 5 conditions before commencement: purification of the organs from ritual impurity and najas, filth; covering the unlawful nakedness with pure clothing; standing on a pure place; knowledge about the start of the prayer time; and facing the Qibla. It is permissible to leave out facing the Qibla in 2 situations: in extreme fear and during a voluntary prayer while traveling on an animal. So now that's the metin. So now we're going to mention the explanation, which is below the line. Let's see, there's a footnote. Okay, it's coming. The author said, Judge Abu Shujā mentioned that the conditions for the validity of the prayer before starting the prayer are 5. There are more than 5, but he chose to mention 5. He said, for the body to be clear from najasa and to be in the state of purification. So let's read footnote 224. It says, here the author is referring to conditions of validity, shurutul sihha, for prayers, and not shurutul wujub, conditions for the obligation, or shurutul qabul, the conditions for the acceptance of the prayer, yani for it to be rewardable. There are 5 conditions for the validity of the prayers, meaning 5 conditions that need to be satisfied before starting the prayers. Abu Shujā chose to mention 5, but there are more than 5. The condition is not part of the deed, prayer, but the deed, prayer, without the condition will not be valid. So from this we know that the integrals of prayer are excluded from this because they are part of the deed, prayer. What is common between the integral and the condition is that they are both required for the validity of the deed, prayer. And the difference is that the conditions for prayer precedes the integrals of the prayer. I think the author meant precedes. So it should be P-R-E. For whoever has the hard copy should fix that. So the conditions for prayer precede the integrals of the prayer. And it means that they come before. Also, there are multiple conditions that continue to be in place together during the entire prayer, whereas all the integrals of prayer do not gather together for prayers. Some of the integrals begin and then end, and then they begin and end. Yani, so basically, the author is referring to, for example, in order for the prayer to be valid, yani before you even start the prayer, you have to be on purification, like wudu or ghusl, for example. And you have to remain in that state of purity throughout the whole entire prayer. So while you're doing the integrals, these conditions also are present. That's an example. Footnote 225. It says, first condition, for one to be pure from the major and minor state of impurity. This includes that one's body parts are pure. Of course, when one is able to perform the purification. This includes removing najasa from inside the mouth, nose, and eye. They must be cleaned from the najasa. Also, one's clothes, meaning what one is wearing, must be pure, and the place of worship must be pure. This means that one's body, or what one is wearing, does not come in contact with unexempted najasa while in prayer. If one is unable to find water or soil, whether in the state of major or minor ritual impurity, one performs the prayer without purification and makes it up later. So this is constantly known in the chapters of the Islamic law. The scholars of the Islamic law, they call this one the person who is void of the two purifiers. So when a person does not have water, then what does he do? He makes tayammum. But he needs the soil to make tayammum. What happens if he doesn't have soil to make tayammum? He prays as is, and then he makes it up afterwards.
That's if the prayer time is going up.
Well, that's if the person, he won't be able to get either of the two purifiers before the prayer goes out, yeah. The author said, this is considered a valid prayer. Yani the prayer which the person had to pray it in that way. It's a validators, and there's a typo here. There's I apostrophe S, so there's a T missing. Its invalidators are similar to the invalidators of a prayer with purification. However, if the one who is in the state of major or minor ritual impurity does not have water or soil in the present, but he knows that he will have access to water or soil within the prayer time, then one waits, unless the time for prayer is getting close to the end. In this case, one prays without having purification and makes it up later. If one had no hope of finding water or soil while it was in the beginning of the prayer time, one can perform the prayer without purification and make it up later. Okay, so if he's in a situation where he knows he's not going to get it, so he doesn't have to wait until near the end. If someone had exempted najasa on the body, clothes, or place of prayer, the prayer would still be valid. An example of that is if a person performs istinja with a stone after defecation. The place does not become pure by using the stone. It is still considered najis. If that person who wiped with stone sat in a small amount of water, it would cause the whole body of water to become najis. But one can pray after wiping with a stone if one makes wudu, even though the exit where one wiped with a stone is still najis, and it can only become pure when one washes that area with water. But still, one can pray with that najasa on him because it is considered exempted najasa. Likewise, one's own blood is exempted, as was mentioned previously. And so to briefly summarize that case, we know that for istinja, it's valid to do it with something other than water that is uprooting and with all the conditions, yani like the stone or like toilet paper, like dry toilet paper. So let's say someone, they made istinja from defecation with toilet paper. So they have a valid istinja and they can do the prayer and it would be a valid prayer, even though there is a trace of the filth still on them. Because the only thing that purifies in the Shafi'i school is water. So even though someone wiped, for example, until the area was clean, they did a valid istinja, still the trace left behind of whatever he wiped, because he didn't use water, the area is still considered to be filthy, right? Still considered to be not pure, but it's exempted, meaning his prayer would be valid if he prays like that. However, if that person who only used the stone or toilet paper to make istinja, if he sits in a small amount of water, yani an amount of water that's less than 2 qullas, then that spot, or since he has not purified it with water, that water becomes filthy. That's basically what he was saying. And it's exempt for the prayer. That state of praying with only making istinja with toilet paper, the fact that his the area that he wiped is not judged as pure is exempt for the prayer. And he's allowed to pray even though that area is not judged as pure because he didn't use water. So if he sits in a small amount of water, the water becomes filthy. And likewise, they mention if that person who only made istinja with toilet paper, if you're praying and then they jump on your back, your prayer becomes invalid. So that's the it's extra detail in that footnote. The author said, page 141, the last sentence of the paragraph immediately under the line, among the conditions for the prayer to be valid is for one to be clear of the major ritual impurity and from the small ritual impurity. This is when one is able to clear oneself from the ritual impurities. So that condition of being clear and free from the hadath, the ritual impurity, that condition is if able. If one is not able to get neither water nor soil to make the purification, then one prays without making purification, so that the prayer time does not end without one performing that prayer in its time. And they say in the law, for the sanctity of the time. They say لِحُرْمَةِ الْوَقْتِ, for the sanctity of the time. Then one repeats this prayer. Also, it is a condition for one's body to be clear from unexempted najas filth. Hence, if one prays while carrying unexempted najas filth on one's body, then one's prayer is invalid. One has to repeat each prayer that he did while having this unexempted najas filth on one's body. And in the Shafi'i school, that's how it is. So if someone has, and you would think, you might wonder, why would someone carry unexempted najas filth? How could it be someone carrying unexempted najas filth? Are they carrying, someone might say, a bag of, or a vial of urine or a vial of feces in their pocket while they pray? It's not just specific to that. What if the person has a bottle of cologne in his pocket that has the actual alcohol in it, even though it's a small percentage? So that would be unexempted filth, and they would be, their prayer would be invalid. And so you would think, oh, well, I don't got to worry about it. I don't wear alcohol. What about the people who have those little mini hand sanitizers and they clip it onto their pants or they clip it onto their keychain and they carry that? Subhanallah. Many calamities came and resulted from the hysteria of COVID. May Allah Ta'ala protect us and have mercy upon us. Many people were carrying those hand sanitizer bottles, and a lot of them, they have the ethyl alcohol. Ethyl alcohol is actually filthy. So people are rubbing their hands thinking that they're sanitizing their hands from supposed germs and supposed viruses, but now they have smeared themselves with najas filth. Subhanallah. Now there is some hand sanitizer that does not use ethyl alcohol. It uses isopropyl. And that wouldn't be filthy. But this shows you the importance of following the rules of Islam and not following secular trends. Because even though in a certain scenario, and it's permissible to use that hand sanitizer, etc., but the one who didn't pay attention and didn't know that this has ethyl alcohol, he then smeared filth all over himself, and now in the Shafi'i school, for sure, his prayer won't be valid until he washes that off. The knowledge is a light that illuminates the path. The author said, hence, if one prays while carrying unexempted najas filth on one's body, then one's prayer is invalid. One has to repeat each prayer that one did. The condition he mentioned is to we'll skip that footnote. This is a condition if one is able to do that. One has to cover one's awrah, unlawful nakedness, even if one is praying alone when no other person sees him. It's still an obligation on the person to cover one's awrah, unlawful nakedness. What is meant is to cover. Scholars, they say, when they mention this rule in the books, they say, even if the person is alone in pitch black darkness, and he has to cover his unlawful nakedness, that he cannot pray naked. One covers with what prevents the color of the awrah from appearing. So when we say covering the awrah, it doesn't mean just the mere placing of a layer on top of the awrah. It has to cover, has to conceal the color. Has to conceal the color. If one does not find something to cover one's awrah, or there is something, but this thing has najasa on it, and one is not able to remove it, in this case, one does not cover one's awrah with this najas, filthy clothes. One prays without covering. For example, if a woman is in prison, and they do not give her something to cover her head, and she cannot find anything to cover her head with, and the time of the prayer is in, she does not leave out praying. She prays without her head covered. Also, if there is a piece of clothes to cover her head with, but it has urine on it, and there is no water with her to wash it, and this is the only thing she has to put on her head, then she prays without putting that on her head. In this case, she is excused for not covering her head, and because she is unable. She is incapable. Likewise, any other part of the awrah, that is, even if a man could not find anything to cover what is between his navel and his knees, or he cannot find anything to cover that except a piece of clothes which is contaminated with urine or blood. In this case, he does not wear that. He prays without covering his awrah. And if you look in the books of the Islamic law, the unabridged works, the comprehensive works, and they go into detail where they say if the person has a piece of clothes that only covers one side. So let's say the man, he needs to pray, and the only piece of clothes that he has is enough to cover one side or the other, the front or the back. The scholars of Islam, they gave an order, and they mention, according to the rules of the law, which side he should give preference to covering. MashaAllah can. May Allah Ta'ala protect us from being in such a situation. But being in such a situation, still the Muslim knows what to do and how he can make his prayer valid. And so in the case of the awrah, whenever you're unable to cover it, you pray with whatever you can cover it with, or whatever part that you can cover, and whatever's left uncovered, you pray like that, and you don't have to repeat afterwards. The third condition he mentioned is to stand on a pure place. This means while praying not to stand, nor to put one's knees, nor one's forehead, nor one's palms on najas filth. If one is praying and a dry najas filth comes in contact with one, and one throws it immediately without carrying it, neither by one's hand or anything else, then one's prayer is still valid. So you might wonder, how could a dry filth land on someone? And there's many ways to picture that. Like if someone was praying outside under a balcony and there was like some dead animal that fell on him, and he would remove it, or dry feces fell on him and he would remove it, but without carrying it, and without it being counted that he's carrying it. And it has to be immediate. If it's not immediate, then his prayer is cut, his prayer is invalidated, he just has to start again. And it's not on him because that filth fell on him without his action. The fourth condition he mentioned is to know that the time of the prayer is in. This is either by one seeing that the sun has set, for example, or that the dawn appeared, or seeing that the sun moved towards the western horizon, or if a trustworthy person knows for sure that the time is in, and that trustworthy person informs one that the time is in. So another typo that needs to be fixed, it's missing the letter T. Or if a trustworthy person knows for sure that the time is in. And the hard copy says, without the T. So it's just HE. So that should be fixed. So how do you know that the time is in? This is either by one seeing that the sun has set, for example, or that the dawn has appeared, or seeing that the sun moved towards the western horizon, or, and you yourself didn't see, but a trustworthy person knows for sure that the time is in, and that trustworthy person informs one that the time is in. If one is not able to know about it for sure that it is in, one makes ijtihad. So in the case where the person can't tell for sure, he makes ijtihad, which one of the best ways that I've seen it translated is due diligence. And he uses his knowledge of the prayer times and the signs of the prayer times and what he can look at and what he can see to do his best determination to judge that the prayer time is in. An example is the rooster. If someone knows that this rooster always crows after the dawn is in, so if the rooster crows, it is permissible for this person to rely on that to pray. So for example, he knows that there's this rooster that crows, and every time that he crows, he checks, he sees that the prayer time is in. So that becomes consistent for him. So then, the next time that the rooster crows, he doesn't have to check if the time is in, because he knows that the rooster crows when the time is in. There's a note here. It says, note, as for the prayer schedule, and what is the prayer schedule? Like the apps that they have, the prayer time, or like those prayer calendars that some so-called Islamic organizations distribute. The person who made it might not have been able to see the exact end of the time of the prayer and the exact start of the next prayer time during particular weather conditions. So he spent many years observing all the days. To make it easy for people, he relied on his observation and put a schedule. He might have added 5 minutes at the beginning of each time to be sure that the previous prayer time has ended. So this means that he stretched the time of the previous prayer time. Hence, if he added 5 minutes to the beginning of the Asr, for example, it means he stretched the time of Dhuhr. This is why one should make ijtihad. So it is important not to delay praying till about 5-10 minutes before the prayer time is over, and to wait a little before praying when it states that the prayer time has started. Yani when you see those calendars. So if you know that the person who made the calendar, they're trustworthy and they know how to determine the beginning and the end of the prayer time through observation, and you know that they put those numbers on the calendar based on their observation, then you should also know that that person, for example, instead of putting at the exact time where he observed, he would add 5 minutes just to be on the safe side. Or he would mention it, let's say 5 minutes before the end, just to be on the safe side, or something like that, so that he can have that cushion or that margin. And so that's why the person that is looking at the calendar, he should not say, oh, the calendar says 7 p.m. and it's 6:55, and he's going to wait till 6:55 to pray. He should, and he do it before that. The fifth condition he mentioned is to face the Qibla. What is meant by facing the Qibla is to direct one's chest towards it while standing up, and directing most of one's body towards it while making ruku' and sujood. So here, first we're mentioning the basic judgment. In the Shafi'i school, so while you're standing up, your chest has to be pointing exactly at the structure of the Kaaba, not the general direction, and not, for example, within a certain degree of angles, like in the Hanafi school. But in the Shafi'i school, it has to be, you determine that this direction that you're facing, if you walked in a straight line without deviating, eventually you would actually hit the body of the Kaaba, the structure of it. That's filthy. This has filth on it. So that's the first thing. So while standing up, the chest has to be touching that. And while making ruku', is your chest going to be facing the Kaaba? No, it's going to be facing the ground. So while you're in ruku', your body as it is in the bowing position, most of it has to be directed towards the Kaaba, and the same thing for sujood. So if one turns his face a little bit to the right or left, this does not invalidate the prayer. The Qibla means the Kaaba. When we say Qibla, what are we referring to? The Kaaba itself. The one who sees the Kaaba directly, the one who sees the Kaaba directs oneself towards it. So now the author is going to be mentioning the different stages and degrees for how to face the Kaaba. So what does this mean? Yani, this means that when the person is in that situation, this is how he determines the Kaaba, the Qibla. This is how he determines that he is facing the Kaaba. When one is in the next situation, this is how he determines. One is in the next situation, that's how he determines. So he starts off first by the obvious one, which is whoever sees the Kaaba. And you would think, and as a learned Muslim, that this is an easy one. This is obvious and known. But it has been transmitted to us from trustworthy sources that they were in Mecca, they were at the Kaaba, whether it was during Hajj or Umrah, and there was a person standing there right next to the Kaaba, and they asked that person, or they asked someone that person knows, which way is the Qibla? Subhanallah. This is a tragedy that the cause of it is ignorance in the obligatory knowledge of Islam. And so this is the reason for the widespread corruption and the general calamities. So if you feel emotional about the crimes and injustice and oppression and murder and torture to the Muslims, then learn the obligatory knowledge and obey Allah. Because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "Inna an-nasa إذا رأوا المنكر فلم يغيروه أوشك أن يعمهم الله بعقاب." Which means, indeed the people, if they see the forbidden matter, if they see the unlawful matter, and they do not change it, the punishment of Allah is close. Yani a general punishment, a general hardship, difficulty, calamity befalls the people. And so those who are pious, and let's say they get bombed, they're going to be what's guaranteed for them is everlasting enjoyment. What's guaranteed for them is the bliss and the everlasting reward, even though they got bombed and killed. The one who wasn't pious and got killed, and the enormous sinner Muslim, he's going to be judged according to his deeds. And so in all cases, the pious Muslim is a winner. Now, if one does not see the Kaaba, so how could it be that you don't see the Kaaba? Because you're very far away, or because there is some physical structures that are blocking you. So if you don't see the Kaaba, what does the author say in the Shafi'i school? If one does not see the Kaaba, but there is another trustworthy Muslim who can see it, then one goes according to his saying. You might think, how can someone not see the Kaaba, but another person can see it? If one is in a valley and the other person is on a mountain and sees the Kaaba, then one goes according to that trustworthy Muslim. If one cannot see it, and there is no trustworthy person who sees it, then one makes ijtihad. So here, there's no avoiding the ijtihad. When you can't see it yourself, and when you don't have the news of someone trustworthy who can see it, which is like seeing it, then what do? Then you have to make ijtihad. Each individual who is in that situation has to make ijtihad. If one is away from the Kaaba, in such a case, he relies on the stars, the sun, and other signs to make ijtihad. Like we said, what is ijtihad? Due diligence. He has to use his knowledge of directions and the signs of which way is north and which way is east, which way is north, which way is south, which way is west, to determine which direction he's going to face that gets him to hit the structure of the Kaaba. Facing the Kaaba is an easy matter. Allah did not order us to do what we are not able to do. This is why the rule to face the Kaaba is an easy rule, which any Muslim can apply, whether he is a scholar or a layman, and whether he is a scholar or a common Muslim, whether he is in a field or on top of a mountain, it is easy to apply. Whether he's in the city or whether he's in a rural area, whether he has cell phone service or he doesn't, whether he is underground or above ground, whether he is in the air or on the sea. This rule is easy to apply. What is that rule? If one is east of the Kaaba, one directs oneself towards the west. And if one is west of the Kaaba, one directs one's chest towards the east. And if one is north of the Kaaba, one directs oneself towards the south. And if one is south of the Kaaba, one directs oneself towards the north. If one is in between the north and the west of the Kaaba, one directs oneself to what is in between the south and the east, and so on. This is why Imam Abu Hanifa said, the one who is north of the Kaaba, he directs himself towards the south. The one who is south of the Kaaba, he directs himself towards the north, etc. So this is important. Why? Especially in the Western countries, especially in North America, especially in Canada, especially in the Western countries. It's important. Why? Because nowadays, many people are misguided about this issue. Many people, they are misguided about this issue. What does that mean? It means they're facing the wrong direction. Why are they facing the wrong direction? Long story, but basically it comes down to, in the 70s, a secular person, some mathematician, some engineer, not a scholar, not an imam, not a sheikh, yani someone that they themselves admit that they are not a scholar, that they are not a sheikh, that they are not trained Islamically, that they are not a teacher in Islam, that they have no formal education, but that they are just a mathematician, that they're just some sort of secular degree. They decided to come up with this fake rule. They decided to come up with this theory, with this whatever. He just made it up, and it doesn't have any proof in Islam, which is basically he's saying that since the surface of the earth is curved, that in order for the Muslim to face the Kaaba, he has to face in the direction of northeast, because of the semicircle route is the shortest distance between 2 points on a curved surface. This person, he wrote an article, he wrote a paper, he wrote a thesis, and it was adopted first by supposedly a mosque in Washington, D.C. So you can go down that information trail, so you can connect the dots on your own. But before that person in the 70s made that article, before he wrote that paper, before he published that paper, all the places in North America, all the musallas in North America, all the cemeteries in North America, they faced east. They faced east, yani according to the rule that was presented by Imam Abu Hanifa radiyallahu anhu. And no respect, especially for those so-called imams, those so-called sheikhs, those so-called whatevers, that they lead Muslim communities, and because of worldly fears, because of worldly influence, because of things that are not relevant Islamically, they go along with what everybody else is doing. So remember, before that article, no place, 0 places in North America, 0 places in USA, 0 places in Canada face northeast. 0. After that article, and it was adopted by that so-called masjid in Washington, D.C., the people and there was a campaign, an agenda to start changing it. So when the Muslims first came to America, all throughout the tradition of Islam in America, from the earliest Muslims that came to America, they faced east. If you look at the cemeteries, the oldest Muslim cemeteries, they are facing east. They can't change those. They're not going to dig up bodies and redig graves and change it. No. They face east. They were facing east. And the musallas and the masjids, so-called masjids, were facing east. Then that article came out and they changed it. And what is their supposed claim? Oh, the earth is curved. The surface of the earth is curved. So in order to get to where we're going, we need to start off on a northeast trajectory, and then because of the curvature, it's going to eventually go down to southeast and then curve back down around to Mecca. And because that's the shortest distance, that's what we have to face. And that is invalid Islamically. There is no Islamic justification for taking the semicircle route, for taking the shortest distance between 2 points on a curved surface. And it is enough for us, and for any seeker of truth. It is enough for any Muslim that cares about his deen. It is enough for any Muslim that has an objective mind and that follows the evidence and doesn't follow emotions and doesn't follow bias and doesn't follow the herd mentality. Because in Islam, we follow the proof and we don't follow the crowd. The scholars, they have said, وَلَا يَغُرَّنَّكَ كَثْرَةُ الْهَالِكِينَ. And do not be deceived by the vast numbers of those who are perishing. Do not be deceived by the vast numbers of those who are astray. The majority of the people are astray. The majority of the people in the world, are they Muslim? No. The majority of the people in the world are kuffar, non-Muslims, non-believers, blasphemers, disbelievers. The majority of them. They are committing the greatest crime, the greatest injustice, which is to worship other than Allah. And even amongst the Muslims, the majority of them are not pious. So only a minority amongst the Muslims are pious. So we follow what is correct regardless of, let's say, numbers, right? So it goes back to how some people say, if everyone is jumping off of a bridge, are you going to do it too? So just because everyone, or a lot of places in the West, particularly in America and Canada, just because a lot of the places, and it's not 100%, there are still some Sunni musallas, masjids that face the correct direction, which is east. Why is east the correct direction? Because where are we relative to the Kaaba? We're to the west of it. We're to the west of it. And depending on where you are in America, or the majority of places in America, you're going to be north of it. So you don't face north to get to a place that's south. This is not like so-called Christopher Columbus. He wanted to supposedly get to India, and India is to the east of him. But instead of going to the east, he went west. He's like, I'll go the other way. This is not so-called Christopher Columbus. This is, if you want to go to a place that's south, you face south. If you want to go to a place that is east of you, you face east, not northeast. So it's enough for us what Abu Hanifa said. He didn't say the shortest distance between 2 points and the earth is curved and the surface of the earth is curved, so you got to follow the shortest distance. No, he did not say that. This is a bid'ah, an innovation, a bad innovation, an invalid innovation, a corrupt innovation that some secular PhD doctor of I don't know what, who masters in trigonometry and whatever calculations came up with. And he himself admits he has no Islamic teaching, training, formal education. He was just making an observation. Obviously an agent. But anyways, the point is, Another proof, besides what Al-Imam Abu Hanifa radiyallahu anhu said, another proof is the fact that the shape of the earth does not change the directions, the cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. So whether the earth was square or cubed or a pyramid shape or a perfect sphere, regardless of the shape of the earth, north will always be north, east will always be east, west will always be west, south will always be south. And another proof, this is also confirmed, you can ask any airline pilot, if you are, let's say in America on the eastern seaboard, and you go in what they call the rumb line bearing, R-H-U-M-B bearing, right? Because the airlines, they don't fly in a straight line. They go the semicircle route. Why? Because it's shorter, because it saves fuel, etc. And in a lot of cases, it's safer. It's not, because that's the only way to go. So they do travel the shortest distance between 2 points because they're planes. They fly up and then they go down. They curve, right? Because the semicircle route, it is a curve. It's not a constant bearing. It's not a constant trajectory. So if you take off from New York and you follow the rumb line, the constant bearing, with basically what people call a straight line, right? If you face like the correct direction of the Qibla. In the plane, you take the plane and you follow that straight line, you will eventually hit the Kaaba. You will eventually, in a straight line, hit the Kaaba. It'll just take longer for the plane to get there. That's fine. The length of time that it takes you to arrive, the route is not our concern. What is our concern is this direction. It's a constant direction. It doesn't change, doesn't curve. If you go in a straight line, even though the surface of the earth is curved, you will arrive straight to the Kaaba. So no respect to those false imams, that they are looked at as leaders in the Muslim community, that they bamboozle their followers into facing northeast just because of a worldly agenda, worldly pressure, worldly fears, and not standing firm on the truth and the law, the Islamic law, and doing what's right. Yes, the people who they face northeast, their prayers are invalid because they're not facing the Kaaba. And Islam is not about your feelings or your emotions or let's say the mistakes that you made. That mistake would not be made if you had not fallen short and you had left out learning the personal obligatory knowledge. But if you had done what you're obligated to do, right? If you had prioritized correctly and you had your priorities straight, which is number one is to obey Allah, right? If your priorities were straight, instead of dividing people along irrelevant lines, instead of dividing people on things that Islamically, that's not how we divide things, that's not how we categorize things. Instead of making that your priority, and then, for example, leaving out learning the obligatory knowledge and knowing what is correct, what the Islamic scholars say in the Islamic law, instead of that, you followed the crowd, you misplaced your trust, and so now you're facing northeast, and so your prayer is invalid. Your prayer is invalid. Another proof, just to conclude on this one, if you're in New York and you're facing northeast, how are you facing the same direction as a Muslim in Brazil? How are you facing the same direction as a Muslim in Brazil? وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, Al-hawa yu'mi wa yuslim, which means the desire, the nafs, the inclination, they make the person blind and deaf. Subhanallah. There's a note here, I'll finish with the note. If the saying of those who work in the field of astronomy or geography or mathematics or the like contradicts the religious sayings, one goes by the religious sayings of the prominent, trustworthy scholars. So that secularist, I think his name was Alti or something like that, Dr. Alti, some guy, that's not a scholar, not a sheikh, he himself says it. It's not that we're, let's say, disqualifying him from being judged as that because we don't recognize him. No. He himself said at the beginning of his thesis, at the beginning of his paper, his article, I am not a sheikh, I am not an imam, I have no formal education in Islam. So, anything a geographer says, anything an astronomer says, anything a so-called scientist says, that contradicts the law, the Islamic law, the saying of a established, confirmed, legitimate scholar of al-Islam, that's based on the religious fundamentals, is rejected. That applies also to those people who claim that they calculate the beginning of Ramadan. But what's an example of that? Like that. If they supposedly a year in advance, supposedly they can tell when the crescent is going to appear because of calculations or whatever. That's not the way that the Prophet ﷺ established the rule. The Prophet ﷺ made it clear. We don't use that for judging this Islamic judgment. Rather, we use the sighting. And nobody can say, oh, well, they didn't have satellites back then. Allah Ta'ala is the all-knowing. So if it would have been a legitimate way, it would have been addressed. But it wasn't. The Prophet ﷺ made it clear. He said, we are what is literally means an illiterate nation. Meaning we don't rely on calculations for the establishment of our Islamic judgments. We go by what the shepherd and the PhD and the illiterate one and the country one and the city one, what they can all do. It's an easy thing. And anybody can know wherever he is in the world, where am I relative to the Kaaba? Am I north of it? Am I south of it? Am I east of it? Am I west of it? If I'm north of it, then I know I gotta face south. If I'm east of it, then I know I gotta face west. If I'm west of it, then I know I gotta face east, etc. So no respect to those betrayers. No respect to those deceivers. No respect to those who bamboozle their communities by facing northeast. And there's a lot of them. Big names too. We're not going to mention their names right now. Maybe we will in the future. But just know, no respect to them. Subhanallah. Fear Allah. On Judgment Day you will be asked. On Judgment Day you will be asked. As for those followers, learn not to be fanatical. Follow the evidence, not the personality. Not the celebrity. Follow the evidence, not the celebrity. And that's what the Sunni Imams, the rule that they put. They said, if your shaykh makes a mistake, you bring it to his attention, you advise him, and if he corrects it, then that's it. Keep following him. And if he doesn't, you abandon him, and you follow the law and Islam. And Allah Ta'ala knows best. We'll continue inshallah next week from page 145. Are there any questions? Check the chat there, give someone a minute to write something if there is a question. So we started one from 138. And we finished 145. 138 to 145. طيب, no questions? طيب, نهلل. لا إله إلا الله. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات وبارك الله فيكم. السلام عليكم.